Welcome to another episode of Progress, Potential, and Possibilities, discussions with fascinating people designing a better tomorrow for all of us. I'm your host, Ira Pastor.
Welcome everybody again to another episode of our show. Today bringing you another truly fascinating individual who has been involved and is continuing to create a better tomorrow for many people. Today we have the honor of being joined by Senator Joe Lieberman, who currently serves as senior counsel at the law firm of Kasowitz, Benson Torres. He advises clients on a wide range of issues, including Homeland security, national security, defense, health, energy, environmental policy, as well as intellectual property matters, international expansion plans. Prior to his involvement at the law firm, Senator Lieberman was our Democratic vice presidential nominee back in 2000. He served for 24 years in the U.S. Senate and there helped shape legislation in virtually every major area of public policy, including foreign policy, fiscal, environmental protection, and a list of other very important areas, as well as serving in many leadership roles, including as both chairman of the Committee on Homeland Security and Government Affairs. Senator Lieberman, prior to involvement in the Senate, served as Attorney General of the State of Connecticut, also in the Connecticut State Senate for 3 terms. In addition to everything he's been involved in his current practice, Senator Lieberman is an honorary national founding chair of No Labels, which is an American political organization composed of Republicans, Democrats, and Independents, ultimately with a mission to usher in a new era of focused problem solving in American politics. Since 2014, Senator Lieberman and former Homeland Security Secretary Tom Ridge have been involved in co-chairing the Bipartisan Commission on Biodefense, which has provided important recommendations to improve U.S. efforts in the biodefense area and plan for future biosecurity and pandemic preparedness. Senator Lieberman is also on the Board of Trustees for the McCain Institute for International Leadership, the Institute of Study of War, and on the Board of Directors for the Center for New American Security. And while he's not doing all of that, he is also an accomplished author. His most recent book, The Centrist Solution, How We Made Government Work and Can Make It Work Again, just came out in October of 2021. We are honored to have him with us today. Senator Joe Lieberman, thank you so much for taking the time to get out of your schedule.
Well, thank you, Ira. Thanks for inviting me, and thanks for that very generous introduction. I look forward to our discussion.
Yeah, you're involved in so many, well, you've been involved, but you're involved in many fascinating initiatives currently, and I think quite apropos of where we've all been living the last couple of years. I'd love to start off with your leadership of this Bipartisan Commission on Biodefense. You are the leader, along with our former governor here in Pennsylvania, Tom Ridge. Other, I look at this sort of centrist team that you've put together of Dr. Donna Shalala, Senator Dom Daschle. You have Peggy Hamburg from the FDA, my buddy George Post, previously from GlaxoSmithKline. Talk a little bit, and we'll get into the Athena Agenda in a bit, but if you could talk a little bit about how you got involved back in 2014 and a little bit about how you put together this really offered this centrist team to focus on this important issue. That'd be a great way to start things off.
Okay, that is a great way to start things. And it's actually a wonderful story. And I give a lot of credit to a man named Bob Cadlick. Bob worked in the Bush White House in Bush 43 in the National Security Council. One of his areas of responsibility was biodefense. He also at different times worked on Capitol Hill in similar areas. So he came to me, I guess, probably 2000, it might have been a little before, in 2013, and he said that he was, based on his own experience, really concerned that the country was not ready for what they described broadly as a biological event, meaning one that was caused by terrorists in a bioterrorist attack, or by a naturally occurring virus infection, or by an accident at a lab facility here in the United States. And he was working hard to get funding from a couple of foundations, which he had begun to secure. And therefore he asked me, mostly based on the fact, two things, as I recall. He said, one, I had been chairman of the Homeland Security Committee, worked on the Homeland Security legislation that created it, the 9/11 Commission. And so I had been involved in early attempts to improve our biodefenses against bioterrorist attacks like the anthrax attacks, which a lot of people forget or never knew about, that followed the 9/11 planes into the buildings. And the second thing was, he knew that separately I had been involved in bipartisan efforts, mostly with the former Republican senator from Utah, Orrin Hatch, in trying to incentivize major pharmaceutical companies to invest in medical countermeasures to bioterrorism and naturally occurring viral outbreaks. So I was quite interested in it, and I really was impressed by the way Bob was going at it. He wanted it to be a small commission. He told me that he was asking Tom Ridge, who I had worked with, liked and respected very much, to be the co-chair. And that's how it started. He got some foundation funding, a little industry funding, not too much. And we went to work in 2014. I must say that based on my own experience, even though I knew that there was a possibility of a major viral outbreak, I certainly was not thinking of a pandemic. I was really focused on bioterrorism. And we went to work, and we produced our first report, a sort of foundational report, in 2015. Basically, and looking back at that report, I'm very proud of it. It seems like we were clairvoyant when you think about the COVID-19 pandemic that came along in recent years, but we weren't clairvoyant. We just talked to the experts in the field, and they said to us, this country is not ready. We don't have enough supplies. We ended up calling when COVID broke out PPE. We don't have enough vaccines ready. We don't have enough diagnostics, that is, tests to tell you whether you got the problem or not. And we made some urgent recommendations in that 2015 report for action by the president, executive branch, and Congress. Part of a big factor that we saw, we were concerned about, there was no responsibility localized. There was no leader of the biodefense effort in the federal government. And there was not even anywhere we could go to get an exact idea of how much money was being spent every year by the federal government, taxpayers, for biodefense. We estimated that it was somewhere over $5 billion. But honestly, the federal government couldn't really bring it all together, didn't have a place. We had to go to, since you're in Pennsylvania, but it's Western Pennsylvania, we had to go to the University of Pittsburgh, which had a program on this subject led by Tara O'Toole, which did have estimates of how much money we were spending. So we made some pretty urgent recommendations, including for a national biodefense strategy. The Obama administration was responsive and began to work on that. Congress enacted some of our individual recommendations, but truthfully, the money was not put behind it. President Trump, when he came in, did issue a national biodefense strategy. But when to say the obvious, when COVID hit in 2020, we weren't ready. And as a result, a lot of people suffered and died. So we're at work now to try to make sure that the same doesn't happen again. And now that it's happened, a lot of others are at work, so we have allies that we didn't have before. So that's sort of a long story to tell you, although short by comparison to having lived through it. Yep. For the last 8 years, basically, working on this commission.
And just a couple months ago, the report entitled "The Athena Agenda: Advancing the Apollo Program for Biodefense" was issued, and in comparison, in the time frame from 2001 to 2014, we spent around $80 billion on this theme. The Athena Agenda calls for $100 billion, and it's an extremely comprehensive report on everything, as you were just mentioning, from vaccines to therapeutics to testing, right, through countermeasures of all types. Could you say a few words about the report and sort of and a theme we'll be getting into? We sort of touch on previous shows when we say the word moonshots, but I come out of it. I was telling you, the biotech industry. I've raised tens of millions of dollars for projects, and I get okay, so $100 billion. It's a little more than we normally think about for these types of things. It's not $200 billion, but still, okay. Where does something like this go, in the sense that you have a centrist group from all angles of different capabilities? How do you get a moonshot like this going? Thinking back to your experience in the Beltway, on Capitol Hill, what's next for something like this?
Yeah, okay, thanks. In my answer to the first question, I didn't focus enough on what you kindly included in the question, which was this, although Bob Cadlick probably never mentioned the word centrist, this is a centrist organization. He certainly mentioned, and we, Tom Ridge and I and the other members mentioned, that it definitely is a bipartisan commission of 6, now 8 members, and we're scrupulous about that. And the message here is pretty obvious, which is there's nothing partisan about a pandemic or a bioterrorist attack. So the response shouldn't be partisan. It's the only way we're going to get something done. So we issued the Apollo report and then followed with the Athena report, which shows that somewhere in our staff there's a Greek mythologist or somebody who goes for those names, but they fit. Certainly Apollo. Most people have to scamper to Google to figure out, reminded who Athena was. But the point was this: when we issued the Apollo report, which I guess was 2021, I'm just looking at it. Mm-hmm. So the pandemic had already been on, and we on the commission felt, okay, there's been an enormous reaction to the COVID-19 pandemic. I mean, by our government, and a lot of governments around the world. We've spent enormous amounts of money on PPE, on testing, and this most sensational and really inspiring investments that we made along with the private sector, with the pharmaceutical industry, in the development of vaccines, which happened really in the world of pharmaceutical work, which you know better than I, almost enlightening speed. I mean, it was amazing, really. And as many, tragically, too many people died in our country, as we know, over 1 million now, but a lot more would have died or gotten very sick without those vaccines. So, but we worried on the commission that as things got better, which they are now, that people would forget about it and the government would forget about it and something else would come up. I mean, look, we're dealing with inflation now and economic concerns about the future, but that every probability was that it would not be another 100 years before another pandemic occurred, and we damn well better be ready for it. And we concluded, based on the reaction and stress and crisis to the onset of COVID-19, that it was rational to have an Apollo project for biodefense to over the next 10 years have the federal government put $10 billion a year into really getting ready and setting a big goal, really as big in its way, maybe bigger, but I think at least as big as the Moonshot program, Apollo, to basically take the threat of a pandemic off the board. And the administration has been responsive, and they're actually now, we're told, they made some statements on this already, but they're now talking about sometime soon issuing a national biodefense program, which is somewhat like Apollo. Matter of fact, the president has used the term Apollo at some point. And as we remember, President Kennedy, I guess it was 61, when he set the goal early in his administration to land an American on the moon within 10 years. And it seemed just fantastic, really, like a fantasy. But he said in that wonderful sentence, which I'm paraphrasing, we don't do this because it's easy. We do it because it's hard.
Yep.
But it's obviously implicit in that is that it's critically important, and Apollo project on biodefense is even more important. So I would say that I personally am somewhat encouraged now that this administration, I mean, look, $10 billion a year, as you said, Ira, if you're in the private sector raising money, $100 billion over 10 years, hey, that's a lot of money. But honestly, when you think about the money that the federal government spent in response to COVID-19, and there are many estimates on this, but the one that I saw that seemed credible to me was that we suffered $16 trillion in economic losses. Yep. As a result of COVID-19 pandemic. So, I mean, cut it in half, 8 trillion. It's an enormous number, and it cries out to us investing 100 billion to eliminate the threat, or at least significantly reduce it, and make sure that we are prepared to take what we're better prepared if it comes, if we can't eliminate the threat. That's really worth it. So, we're going to work with allies. Look, the Gates Foundation has been on this for a period of years. You've got interesting new players. What's his name? Bankman-Fried, who's been Samuel, I guess, active in cryptocurrency, created with his brother a nonprofit called Guardians Against Pandemic, and they're beginning to work. And they're specifically, our commission works with Capitol Hill on legislation, but we haven't gotten involved in politics. Their group has a political wing that is actually supporting candidates in elections who promise to do something to prevent or be really able to respond to the next pandemic. So we're out there, our Biodefense Commission, but we're very happy that others have entered the arena and are fighting alongside with us.
Excellent. Senator, moving from pandemics, but staying on health, during your time in the Senate, you were instrumental in the development of the American Center for Cures Act. That ultimately leads to the creation of the NIH Cures Acceleration Network and these national centers for translational sciences of expediting therapeutic development for, we'll call it, these unmet conditions. And it's very interesting because, as you know, President Biden recently unveiled this Advanced Research Project Agency for Health, analogous to our DARPA. And I've been honored to have several guests from DARPA on the show, and one of them, Dr. Colonel Jeffrey Ling, he used to head up the Biologic Technologies Office over there. He pointed out to me on the show that we at DARPA do things quite differently than, say, the NIH, or private sector venture capitalists, where they might take your business plan and your research plan and dissect it for 6 months and look at all the risk and try to figure out why not to give you money, give you tranches of money while you do your research. On the DARPA side of things, Jeff's position was like, we look at something and we make a decision in 5 minutes. Does it sound cool? And if it does sound cool, we get the best minds in the world and a lot of money. We put them together, we make stuff happen. Very different approaches. As in your current position and keeping your ear to what's going on in DC and on these programs, what is your position on, so as having been involved in expediting translational sciences for unmet medical needs, what is your position on something like ARPA-H and how? Because I know this was one of the debates that happened like the day after it was announced.
Right. So I'm very supportive of ARPA-H. I mean, obviously, it has to be. The question is now, how is it developed? But I mean, let me go back. I was generally interested in how does the federal government partner with the private sector to support innovation and obviously economic development. And I thought that DARPA, I was on the Armed Services Committee, was an extraordinary success. I mean, the famous successes from DARPA where they invested in early stage, such as became the internet.
Yep.
Pretty good return on investment, and there were others as well. So that was the model. I was a big supporter of DARPA. I spent time out there. I don't know that I ever had that same reaction to what they did. That, hey, 5 minutes, this is cool, let's go with it. But they were not that bureaucratic. That was the whole point. And the point was to basically take an idea, an innovative idea, and help it become real when in a situation particularly where the private markets were for some reason not funding it. In other words, to take a bigger risk, you might say, than the private markets were willing to take. And it paid off. I will tell you personally, and not many people know this, but I was blessed to have a seat at the table in 2001 and 2 when we drafted and then enacted the legislation that created the Department of Homeland Security.
Yep.
And I was so impressed by DARPA that I worked hard with my colleagues in both parties to create a science and technology section there, which was supposed to, and has to some extent, mimic DARPA in the area of Homeland Security. So flash forward a little bit, there were a few people who came to me, one a doctor, one a businessman concerned about public health during my days in the Senate, worried that there was some great research going on in health and disease treatment, even cures. And it was just not, it was not being translated into real treatments and cures fast enough. And that was the initial motivation for what we called at that point, the American Cures Center, I believe. And that also was bipartisan. Never quite got it done, but people persisted after I left, and some did happen. And I see the Advanced Research Projects Agency for Health, ARPA-H, which President Biden essentially created by executive order, or Secretary Becerra did at HHS, and put it into NIH. But that's why I said I think it's an exciting idea and holds real potential for earlier availability of remarkable treatments and cures for disease. But it depends on obviously how it's developed. And the criticism is that some have issued. Well, there was just recently Wall Street Journal editorialized against it because they said that they thought it was entering the private markets, and because the private markets were taking care of all this. Well, they're not. Yeah. And I can tell you that I tried hard with Orrin Hatch and others, 15, 20 years ago, to create incentives for the pharmaceutical industry to develop medical countermeasures, vaccines, treatments for bioterrorist attacks or naturally occurring viral pandemics like COVID-19. The problem, as you well know, Ira, for the industry was who knows what the market is? In other words, okay, but until it happens, then there's an enormous market, and the companies were not willing to invest, billions in developing research, developing these treatments. We try to create incentives, but never could quite do it without getting somebody else angry and offended. So next time we talk, I'll tell you some of those war stories. So there is a need for an agency like ARPA-H. Now, it can't be swallowed up by NIH. It can't just become part of NIH. It's just located there. Frankly, if I had my druthers, I might locate it more generally in HHS as a separate component, because it's got to act different. It's supposed to take some of what is done at NIH and elsewhere and fund it so that it can, those promising experiments, if you will, can be turned into treatments and cures for disease.
One of the guests that I had on the show about a year ago was Bawa Jain, and I neglected at the introduction of the show to mention that you are also on the advisory panel for his Center for Responsible Leadership, and here, we have different views and a group that's come together to provide solutions, not just from different political views and different nations, but different religions as well. I was wondering if you could just say a few words about your involvement with the CRL. I was invited to a few of these collaborations they had with the Clinton organization, looking at faith-based solutions to the opioid crisis. But if you could talk a little bit about your involvement and a little bit about how these groups and those like it can really provide an important piece to, again, some of these major problems that are facing society that we're not dealing with entirely correctly anymore. In one case, the opioid crisis, but out there.
Okay, I'm glad you asked the question. I'll start back a little bit because, I'll start really personally. I'm Jewish. My religion is important to me. I'm observant, and as part of it, I've always felt, been taught by my rabbis, that it's not just the question of going to synagogue on Saturday or observing the Sabbath or eating kosher food. You got to take the values out into the world and work with others of different religions to try to improve the world. And I've always had a faith, I suppose the word is quite intentional. I've had a faith that there's common ground between people whose religions are important to them. I actually always found that in my political career, though in Connecticut, where I was elected a senator for 4 terms, the Jewish population is about 2%, but mostly a Christian state, like most of the country. But people seem to feel a bond with me because some of my observances were not familiar, like not being involved in politics on the Sabbath on Friday night and Saturdays. So, but it created, it didn't, it's a wonderful thing to say about America. It didn't put them off. It seemed to create ties, which I appreciated. So hopefully, I always have had the dream that that basis can lead to cooperative work on major global and national problems. And Bawa Jain and Sheikh Mohammed Al-Isa, who is the head of the World Muslim League, he is a Saudi sheikh, very progressive, outreaching. I think he shares these same beliefs, could express them better than I did, but as I just expressed. And, we've had a couple of meetings, they've been involved in some stuff. I think it's all positive. As always, the question is, how do you focus on it? I mean, for instance, Sheikh al-Sisi made a visit to Auschwitz. Pretty amazing, really. And I think it touched him, but I know it touched a lot of Jews around the world. And it basically said, okay, we have disagreements about this or that political issue in the Middle East, but we're coming from a common core where the brutal murder of people that occurred during the Holocaust is unacceptable to any religion. And in Sheikh al-Sisi's case, he was saying unacceptable to Islam. Now, of course, we've seen an example of this more broadly in the so-called Abraham Accords, which were negotiated by the Trump administration, Israel, UAE, Bahrain, Morocco, and Sudan. Quite a breakthrough, but they called them, I thought it was great. Of course, there are political reasons why this has happened, including their shared fear of Iran, but they called it the Abraham Accords, which is a way of saying all of, at least Islam, Christianity, and Judaism, all sort of begin with God and Abraham. So the Abraham Accords are an encouraging step forward. So, and incidentally, there have been other less visible attempts over the years that, because I've been interested in the Middle East so much, that I've been involved in, initiated by imams and rabbis in the region, quite remarkable, to try to build a common core. One of my, I'll just tell you briefly, one of my colleagues, Tom Coburn, unfortunately now passed away about a year ago, very devout Christian. So he said to me at one point, you know, there's a delegation of people coming from the Middle East, clergymen who are working to create a dialogue. And it said the imam, the mufti of the Palestinians now in Jerusalem, et cetera, and the two chief rabbis of Israel are coming. So I must say, I thought to myself, I will believe it when I see it. But, you know, I went to the meeting place, and that, because I owed it, because he was my friend to see, and I was fascinated. And there were the two chief rabbis of Israel with high-ranking Muslim and Christian clerics from the Middle East. And it was quite productive. So let us hope and pray, I should say, with God's help, inshallah, and in Hebrew they say, B'ezrat Hashem, that that Bauer Jane and Sheikh al-Sisi, the Abraham Accords, continue to create progress. I mean, we know, sadly, through a lot of history, including modern history, that religion has been a source of hatred, division, and violence. But there's the other side where it can create bonds. And I think we really have to work to make sure that that side triumphs, which I think it's the hope of that is being advanced by Bawa and Sheikh al-Sisi.
Excellent. Senator, one thing that another thing you're well known for is your contributions to national security, to our armed forces, of course, to our veterans. You were involved in, as mentioned, the creation of the Department of Homeland Security, and we recently had their current head of R&D, Catherine Mitchell, on the show. You were involved in restructuring FEMA, and Craig Fugate from the FEMA Obama administration joined us. And you know, one of the extremely interesting things that you know, I would like to profile is sort of the dual use potential. You know, we think of obviously our military and national security, but there's so much more, as you were just mentioning, from DARPA that comes out of that, like the internet, like GPS and so forth. Can you say just a couple words about, you know, we talked about some of these new agencies that are being set up, but here are some, whether they're our Department of Defense, whether our Homeland Security and so forth. These are agencies that do more than just their sort of mission statement. They're involved in innovation that impacts us for many decades in the future. Talk a little bit about some of that. If you
No, it's true. This is something that, you know, I came with an interest. I came to the Senate in 19 '89 with an interest in national security, foreign policy. I wanted to get on the Armed Services Committee. The way of the Senate took me 2 terms, but because it's a sought-after committee, but I did. And one of the things I learned was that a lot of investments that the Pentagon makes through its vast budget, which I guess is now, wow, maybe over $700 billion a year, as the latest budget proposed by President Biden. Its focus obviously is to make investments through DARPA, but also other of the service budgets to work with the private sector to develop systems, equipment, cyber systems that not only are important for our national security, national defense, but have very significant spin-offs into the private sector and create jobs. I mean, not only do they improve our lives and create some breakthroughs, but they're great for economic development. I mean, I happen to have been in a state which had a history of defense industrial locations. I mean, at one point, at least maybe somebody in Connecticut called us the arsenal of democracy way back to the revolution, but it continues now. Electric Boat builds submarines, Pratt Whitney does jet engines, of course he does helicopters, and it goes on and on. But what I was fascinated at one point, and this happened with the submarine company, Electric Boat. They invited people to Washington really to lobby for support for submarines, but they didn't just bring them from Electric Boat. There was an enormous number, something over 100 smaller companies around Connecticut. They call them vendors. You know, they sell to Electric Boat, mostly technology companies, which were supported by Electric Boat, but that is, they sold things to Electric Boat. But that business enabled them to do other things, both to apply what they had learned to private sector markets, but also obviously to have the ability financially, based on the business they were doing with Electric Boat, to do their own innovation. So the defense budget has one big goal, which is to protect the security of the American people. But it has really positive economic, technological, I should say, industrial and economic spillovers, which are generally beneficial to our society.
So, Senator, we've talked about moonshots now. We've gone from biodefense to health to the Department of Defense. Let's move to the biggest moonshot of all, or the moonshot with the biggest challenge, which you talk about in your book, the Making Government Work Moonshots. And it's a great read. You start off by taking us back to Aristotle and the Judeo-Christian scholars and philosophers of the Enlightenment. We go through your career, and then we end up with Harvard Business School's Michael Porter talking a little bit in 2022 about, wow, we have this business of government. It's a duopoly who doesn't care about its customers, that can discard its regulations, has unlimited funding, and can remove products from the market if it wants, like the centrist product. Please talk for a little bit about No Limits, some of what you're doing, how you got involved, some of what you're doing there, and how we can create this this ultimate moonshot of making our government work a little better.
Well, first, thanks for that question, Ira. And the question was so informed that I believe you actually read the book. So thank you. I'll put this in a broader context, do it very briefly. And it was the way you posed the question was really, I think, right on, which is the biggest moonshot of all. And yet we have to go back and say, in our time, we have experienced miracles technologically, and in terms of what we were talking about earlier, our health. I mean, we're being kept alive better, longer, as a result of pharmaceutical health, improvement in medical devices, et cetera, et cetera. and yet, like, this thing didn't exist not so many years ago. It still excites me that I can punch some numbers up and I can call anybody in the world, pretty much. Pretty exciting. My kids are not that excited because they've had it all their lives. My grandchildren particularly. But the sad fact is that we're still fighting with each other. I mean, there are wars. Look at what's happening with Russia invading Ukraine. It feels like it's a century or 5 centuries ago. Terrible. And here in this country, notwithstanding all the improvements in our quality of life, there's anger, there's division. Some of it caused, I think, by changes in our society which affect people, technological changes which make people nervous about what their own economic future will be, because they're not sure they can keep up with the technological changes. Big demographic changes. I mean, we're in the foreseeable future going to have a population that's more than half not white, because I believe these changes have occurred before, and they strengthen our country, and they will do it again. But meantime, politicians come along and exploit those anxieties that people have. And the parties, for their own interests, come along and exploit them and forget that what we're elected to do is serve the public interest, the national interest, and the parties come second, third, fourth, fifth, but not first. So everything I did, I'll say real quickly, that I really cared about, or looking back at the things I'm proudest of that I did during my 24 years in the Senate, and it was a varied list of things: the Clean Air Act, Balanced Budget Act, the Homeland Security Department, repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell. Those were all bipartisan. Everything I did there was with a Republican or more than one Republican. So that's the way you get things done, and that's the way you serve the public interest. And I will tell you that the last 2 of my 24 years in the Senate were the least productive for me and for the Congress, because it was so partisan. It's not why I left. I always wanted not to end my life in the Senate, but to have a chapter afterward. But I promised myself that I would try to work to overcome that problem and go back to the days not so long ago, when the 90s, when Bill Clinton worked with Newt Gingrich to get some big things done. In the 80s, President Reagan, Speaker O'Neill, all bipartisan, big accomplishments, even though they disagreed on a lot of other things, maybe most other things. So I joined No Labels, which is a group started by one person, a classic story, Nancy Jacobson, 2010, just got fed up with the division. And, we've worked pretty hard to support centrists in both parties who are running for Congress, or to keep them in Congress. And centrism, I rush to explain, is not the same as moderation. You can be a liberal or conservative or Democratic or Republican or independent, and moderate centrist. Centrism means that you're willing to come to the center, talk respectfully, civilly with people who are on the other side, and negotiate, compromise, which is always necessary in a democracy to get something done, and then get something done. Yep. Solve a problem, seize an opportunity for the country. I think we've made really good progress in electing what we call problem solvers to the House and the Senate. They were the ones who originated the bipartisan infrastructure bill a year or so ago, which everybody brags about. And they just did the same, not alone, but they were involved in the leadership of the effort to adopt the first gun control, or now as they call it, gun safety legislation law, in almost 30 years. So the book is about, in a way, it's a memoir, but of my, what I think are my best hits, so to speak. but it's a sort of a how-to. How did it get done?
Yep.
And you're very kind to talk about the Greek philosophers and Judeo-Christian tradition, because all those great intellectual and religious sources of our civilization in America favored centrism, the
Yep.
golden mean, the middle way. It was always the way. Thomas Aquinas, Aristotle, there are various Talmudic rabbis. So we're not out of it yet. A lot of work to be done. But I'm continuing to work through No Labels. I'm really grateful for the chance to do that. And I think we're making progress. And I can tell you this, it's not only my impression, it's from polling. There are far left, far right, and both parties, Democrat, Republican. The biggest group is the middle group.
Mm-hmm.
They want something to get done.
Sweet.
And they want both parties to work together, and that's not yet happening. So, I always tell them, you can make it happen. Just get out there and vote for people, or run yourself for people who will work together to serve our country and realize its great potential. And frankly, don't say it simplistically, but it's still real, to make sure that our children and grandchildren have lives as full of opportunity and freedom as I did and you are now. There are generations behind me, but may it continue to be full of opportunity for you in every way. So, okay, thanks. This has been a great discussion. Thank you.
Yeah, this is awesome. I really appreciate your time, Senator, and I not just for what you've been doing, but everything you're doing now and continue to. For everybody that's going to be listening to this episode or watching on the YouTube channel, again, you've been listening to Senator Joe Lieberman, Senior Counsel, Kasowitz, Benson Torres, founding chair, No Labels, co-chair of the Bipartisan Commission on Biodefense, and definitely please pick up a copy of The Centrist Solution, How We Made Government Work and Can Make It Work Again. Again, Senator, thank you for your time.
Thank you, Ira. All the best.
As we say on this show, thanks for helping to create a better tomorrow for all of us. But great seeing you.
Amen. Amen.
Be well.